It was never supposed to happen. 4 teenagers from Sydney who looked like a boy band, dressed like skaters, and played like their amps were on fire. They opened for One Direction and hijacked the whole show. They wore eyeliner, screamed into microphones, and wrote about heartbreak like it was a contact sport. By the time critics figured out what was going on, it was too late. 5 Seconds of Summer had crashed the party, kicked down the pop door, and plugged pop-punk rock back into a generation that barely knew Blink-182. They were supposed to be the next One Direction. Clean cut, safe, radio ready. But 5 Seconds of Summer never got that memo. Because what started as pop ambition turned into something louder, something messier, something real. They weren't chasing trends. They were chasing freedom, the kind only a guitar solo can buy. So what happened next? Let's just say chaos looked good in skinny jeans. And when Luke Hemmings screamed that final chorus live, it felt less like a performance and more like a revolution. Because that night, 5SOS didn't just play pop, they burned it down. And it all started with a song called She Looks So Perfect. Here's the thing. We all know how a boy band story usually goes. Matching outfits, catchy pop hooks, carefully choreographed smiles. 5 Seconds of Summer, Luke Hemmings, Michael Clifford, Callum Hood, and Ashton Irwin started out like any garage dream, posting YouTube covers, jamming in tiny rooms, chasing something bigger, until one day they landed the gig every young band fantasizes about, opening for One Direction on their Take Me Home tour. That's when the world met 5SOS and didn't quite know what to make of them. They had the look of a boy band, but the noise of a pop-punk gig. By 2014, their debut single, She Looks So Perfect, exploded across charts, hitting number 1 in 11 countries. But fame didn't tame them. It only made them louder. Even when they took 2 years off, they didn't retreat. They regrouped. In Sweden, they worked with hitmakers like Rami Jakob and Carl Falk, the pop scientists behind Britney and Ariana. Luke later laughed. The Swedish style of songwriting is so mathematical. Rami was literally counting syllables on the desk. But here's the twist. Behind all that studio polish, they never lost the chaos that made them different. Beneath the glossy surface was the attitude. Raw, restless, and so rock. Because long before fame, there was grit. In late 2011, 4 high school friends from Sydney were posting grainy covers under Hemmings' YouTube channel, practicing in garages, dreaming between part-time jobs, and chasing an echo no one else would hear. Their first gig, the Annandale Hotel. 12 people showed up, but it felt like 12,000 in their heads. They didn't know it then, but those walls were listening to history being born. They had no label, no marketing machine, just a camera, a few guitars, and something to prove. Their covers of Blink-182 weren't nostalgia. They were rebellion, a reminder that pop could still have calluses. Every generation gets one band that wasn't supposed to make it, until they did. Here's where it gets interesting. They literally went from the pub stage to facing stadiums overnight. In 2013, they were the opening act. By 2014, they were the main event. It's not an exaggeration. It's the trajectory of 5SOS. Touring with One Direction meant the screaming, the flashing lights of global stardom. They soaked it all in, drank it like a shot, and emerged with an identity. Imagine being 20 and suddenly treated like rock gods. The flights, the tours, the screaming fans, the empty moments backstage. All of it. They began to understand the machinery of fame, even as they looked distinctively nothing like the boy bands that dominated the airwaves. Skinny jeans, emo eyeliner, guitars. They owned it, and they flipped the script. But here's what made it electric. They didn't chase fame. They crashed into it. One minute, they were kids with guitars. The next, they were a global headline. Yet beneath the confetti and chaos, they still tuned their own instruments, still carrying that garage band hunger. Every night on tour, they'd rip through She Looks So Perfect like it was their first gig again. Amps crackling, voices raw, sweat flying. That's the 5SOS paradox. Too polished for punk, too reckless for pop. Even backstage, chaos wasn't glamorous. It was survival. Phones dying, voices cracking, guitars out of tune. And yet they still walk out smiling. Because in their heads, the kid who played to 12 people in Sydney was still there. Some nights, the spotlight felt heavier than the guitar. They weren't sure if they were rock stars or experiments, but they knew one thing. They'd rather burn out on stage than fade into radio silence. They didn't fit the mold. They smashed it, rewired it, and painted it black. 5SOS didn't ask to be the next One Direction. They asked to be loud, real, and heard. And somehow, that was louder than any pop chorus. The transition from social media cover band to full-on chart-dominating act was swift, but the epicenter of that change was in their sound. The 2014 debut leaned pop, yeah, but underneath you heard the echoes of Blink-182 and Green Day. Critics called Don't Stop their pop-punk anthem. Their 2015 second album, Sounds Good Feels Good, topped the charts again. They wrote love songs that sounded like rebellion. They made teenage heartbreak sound like rebellion, and rebellion sound like therapy. Somewhere between the glitter of pop and the grit of punk, they found lightning. You could hear it in the crunch of She's Kinda Hot, or the heartbreak of Jet Black Heart. It was the sound of four kids trying to grow up louder than their pain. They were mislabeled, called a boy band because of their fans, because of their rise, because of the circuit. But in truth, they held their own instruments. They smashed their own stages. Their style was guitars on fire, vocals raw, lyrics referencing more than who liked who. They hunted authenticity in an era increasingly polished. Yet beneath the adrenaline, the gigs, the hits, they were still young men discovering themselves. And the scenery around them, stadiums, air miles, screaming fans, felt chaotic. Because when you rise that fast, something always breaks. A friendship, a sound, or a silence no one talks about yet. Which brings us to the fall. By late 2016, 5 Seconds of Summer had done what no one expected. A punk-leaning band selling out arenas across continents. Their Sounds Live Feels Live World Tour was massive, but behind the sold-out shows, something was cracking. The pace, the pressure, the constant spotlight. It caught up. They called it time out. For the first time since 2011, the band hit pause. No shows, no press, no new songs, just silence. 7 years in, fame had eaten our youth. Luke Hemmings later said, "It wasn't burnout. It was an identity crisis." They'd been labeled, packaged, pushed. And for a band that started in garages and YouTube corners, that label felt too tight to breathe in. 2 years of silence followed. The tour buses stopped, the crowds moved on. And in those quiet months, they started asking the hard questions. Are we done? Or do we start again? On our own terms? That's when new faces took over the charts. Labels stopped calling. Even fans wondered if 5SOS had quietly split. For a band that once lived on adrenaline, the stillness felt brutal. The fall wasn't explosive. It was quiet. Hotel rooms at 3 a.m., guitars left untouched. Old demos played in the dark. They watched peers rise on pop radio, the boy band tag sticking harder than ever. For a moment, even they started believing it. But here's the thing. Punk doesn't die. It reinvents. And that's exactly what they were about to do. When they finally returned, it wasn't with noise. It was with control. In 2020, they dropped Calm, and everything changed. It wasn't a comeback album. It was a declaration, a statement that said, "We've grown. Deal with it." The sound was grittier, glossier, more grounded. The glitch pop grit, the dark synth lines, that steadier voice, it all felt intentional. They learned that calm isn't silence, it's strength. Songs like Easier and Teeth, featuring Tom Morello of Rage Against the Machine, show that evolution loud and clear. They didn't just say, "Look at us grown up." They showed it, through the bite of their instruments, the honesty in their lyrics, and the attitude that said, "We're not chasing trends anymore." Behind the beats was reflection about time, identity, and the toll of being called a boy band when you spent years bleeding like a punk quartet on stage. Sure, there was chaos. A shipping error sent Calm to US shelves a week early, but Destiny didn't mind. They became only the second Australian band in history to have their first 4 full-length albums debut at number 1 back home. And with that, 5SOS proved something powerful. Growth isn't betrayal, it's expansion. They weren't the teenage underdogs anymore. They were creating their own sound, but this time much calmer, sharper, and finally in control. Now, years in, what is the legacy of 5SOS? They started as a cover band on YouTube, just 4 Aussie teens chasing a sound louder than their hometowns. But somewhere between messy guitar riffs and global stadium lights, they became a movement. From pop chaos to punk poetry, they grew up, and so did their fans. Solo projects sprouted like side stories in a shared universe. Hemmings diving into introspection, Irwin into rhythm and reflection, Hood exploring emotion through bass lines, Clifford sharpening his production genius. Their fan base didn't fade, it evolved with them. The numbers are unreal. Over 10 million albums sold, 7 billion streams, and countless tours that blurred genres and generations. Yet, what still stands out isn't the stats, it's the spirit. Pop meets punk, rebellion meets melody. And now comes the next chapter. Everyone's a Star, dropping November 14th, 2025. An album that leans fully into the meta. The ironic Your Favorite Boy Band quiz, the vintage Y2K flyers, the knowing wink at fame itself. They're not just making music anymore, they're making waves. They're asking fans, who are you? Loud, quiet, wild, funny. And somehow the answer always circles back to 5SOS. They began as 4 kids from Sydney, opened for One Direction, crashed the pop party, injected it with punk adrenaline, fell, burned out, rebuilt. And now they stand taller because of it. Because their legacy isn't written in numbers or awards. It's written in the songs that reminded a whole generation what rebellion sounds like when it grows up. So here's my question to you. Whether you screamed "She Looks So Perfect" in an arena, or you found 5SOS in your Spotify mix at midnight, what's your favorite moment when you knew this band was more punk than pop? Comment, share, scream it out. Because maybe, just maybe, pop-punk never died. It just changed its accent, learned to play stadiums, and came from Sydney. The next album's almost here. Everyone's a Star drops November 14th, 2025. Tune up your guitar, turn the volume all the way. And remember, 5 Seconds of Summer were never meant to behave. They were meant to break something. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into your favorite bands and the stories behind them. Drop every week.